As I think I may have told you before, I had a strange experience a couple of years ago. I was standing in my garden in the early dawn when suddenly I saw what looked like the face of Jesus looking back at me from the grass. Just his head, mind, as though someone had buried Jesus in his neck, up to his neck in the lawn. It was a bit of a shock, I can tell you, until I realised that what I was actually looking at was a football, which our dog had chewed to pieces. And in the right light, it looked just like the face of a bearded man looking right at me. Well, my first thought, of course, was eBay. I could make a fortune, couldn't I? The face of Jesus on a Vickers football, that would be worth something, surely. But then it set me to wondering. For a start, no one actually knows what Jesus looked like. There are no contemporary portraits of him by anyone who knew him. Most of us have a picture in our minds. It's probably, if you grew up in the United Kingdom like me, it's probably a picture of a white man, white skin, long blonde hair, a beard, and so on. A bit like the Jesus in our stained glass window up behind me. But actually, the chances are that he would have had short hair in the Roman style, probably no beard in the Roman style, and a Middle Eastern face. So on reflection, I decided that peddling dubious images of Jesus on a football wouldn't really be very appropriate, so I kicked the ball back up the garden again. But I wonder if you've ever tried to imagine the face of God. It's impossible, of course, but I think it is possible to imagine what God's expression might be over certain events. I imagine God looking, frankly, a little disappointed at the moment. I imagine him looking at the mess that our world is in and being a bit perplexed, to say the least. He might be perplexed at watching the uber-wealthy businessmen of the world continuing to get richer and richer, while the homeless and the poor and the COVID-related jobless struggle. I wonder how disappointed God's face might look when he ponders the inequality between nations, when he sees that some nations, like ours, will be vaccinated by the summer, and other nations may never be able to afford the vaccine. I wonder what God's face looks like when he sees the rise of popularism and fundamentalism across the planet. I especially wonder what God's face looks like when he contemplates the sheer waste that is involved in the celebration of his son's birthday. According to the waste disposal company PHS, something like 4.2 million Christmas dinners are wasted in the UK alone each year. 4.2 million. That equates to approximately 263,000 turkeys, 7.5 million mince pies, 240,000 slices of Christmas pudding, which I'd be very glad to eat if somebody would like to send them to my house, 17.2 million Brussels sprouts, 19 million carrots, and 11.3 million roast potatoes. Each year, the UK spends a combined total of around £700 million on unwanted Christmas presents. Just frippery and nonsense that no one needs. 227,000 miles of wrapping paper is thrown away each year. 1 billion Christmas cards get put in the bin, and not usually the recycling bin. As well as imagining God's expression, I wonder if we can try putting ourselves in God's shoes for a moment. What would you do about all these problems if you were God? Perhaps you would be tempted to jolly well sort it all out. Perhaps you would appear on a thundercloud and lay down the law with an iron fist, coupled with the threat of thunderbolts and lightning, very, very frighteningly. Galileo, for those who understand what I'm saying. Perhaps you would use your almighty, omnipotent power to force people to be kind to one another and to the planet that we've been given to care for. But if you did that, you might find you have a new problem. Instead of a human race that chooses of its own free will to love you and worship you, you would have created a race of puppets, really. You would have rejoiced the beautiful thing that a human being at its best can be into something not much better than a toy. Adam and Eve reduced to Ken and Barbie. And any love or worship that they would have offered you or one another would be a poor thing indeed, a mere shadow, a fabrication, like one of those teddy bears that you pull out the string and it says back to you, "I love you." So what do? How do you persuade humankind that there's another way? How do you speak a word to them that they will hear and to which they can respond with all their hearts? Well, here's what you do, according to the scriptures. You send them a son, a human being who is so filled with God that he can say with integrity, "I and the Father are one." You send them a word clothed in flesh. You show them what a human life can be like if it overflows with God. You send them a word which reveals the full glory of God by living the kind of life that God calls all his creation to live. You send them a baby. You send humanity the most fragile form of humanity that you can conceive. You do it so that humankind sees that the glory of God is not shown in acquiring wealth or living in great palaces or looking after number one or living in hatred towards others, but the glory of God is shown in the weakest kind of human being possible. A baby in a stable, the son of a peasant woman in a backwater of a mighty empire. If you could stand in God's shoes today, perhaps you too would send humankind a divine word clothed in flesh. For at Christmas, God comes to us as a human to show us what it's like to be fully human. By his life of selfless giving, sacrifice, love, and compassion, Jesus shows us the heart and the face of God. That's what the shepherds saw in our gospel reading of this morning. And that's why they went away glorifying and praising God. Perhaps we might do the same. Amen.